Our season continues on the trip from Byss to Foma in the western quadrant of the galaxy. Sola Gray was waiting to arrive so she could give Revan the sphere she found on Byss. While her injuries were daunting, she believed she'd be a good warrior for Revan. She, of course, was unaware of what Malgus said in regard to her no longer being his second in command. She had no reason to assume that. She was just hoping that Revan would treat her better than Malgus did, which wasn't really saying that much. As she got up, her ribs creaked, but it was alright. The back patches were seeping through, and they were working their way through her tissue and into her bones. It would help, but she needed to remain away from activities for at least 12 hours. Good thing it was such a long journey. She had probably gotten a third of that under her belt, and after a nap she began to analyze the sphere again. It belonged to an ancient people on Byss, and unlike the weapon from Mandalore, hadn't been passed down from generation to generation. It was kept in a museum, and its purpose was for art. Now it was going to be used to fuel a nightmare for the galaxy, especially for the ancestors of those who perished on Byss after Malgus' arrival. She twisted the sphere around in her hands, looking for something to gain from it. She looked thoroughly at the sphere and pondered over the planets she had and whether they were right or not. Turns out they were, but everything else was simply a mystery to her. The language didn't make sense. All that made sense was the style in which the planets were arranged. She spent hours toiling over it, even writing out all the markings on a large sheet of paper so that she could analyze it better. That clearly wasn't working for her. Sola's hope was to have something more useful for Revan because she didn't know how cruel he could be or if he would simply kill her or not. She then realized that the spheres were pointing to each planet because apparently there was supposed to be a clue on each planet that one could utilize to find the Starforge. She was so annoyed. It could never be easy with these things. Eventually she arrived over the planet of Foma. Revan's fleet was situated. Outside the fleet there was a wreckage field. It was a mix of two fleets, one Republic and one Separatist. It seemed like one of those rare occurrences when two fleets arrive at the same location at the same time. Sola didn't make a mention or notice of any of it. She flew past it like it was a small asteroid belt. When she docked with Revan's flagship, she was permitted to enter, once an armed guard came in to make sure she wasn't a traitor. Revan wasn't given the best report from Malgus, but this was pretty typical. There's a reason why Malgus was on his own most of the time, simply because he didn't like to play nice. Sola was escorted to the bridge of the vessel and found Lord Revan standing at the front of the bridge, looking out over the wreckage field. Behind him on the little catwalk that stood over the deckhand's positioning were a line of Sith. Closest to Revan was Malak, his apprentice, and falling down were a bunch of nameless Sith, some wearing masks, others not. Revan turned to face her and asked her what he brought to her, and if she had time to analyze everything on the drive since the Battle of Byss. She nodded her head without speaking outwardly. She didn't want to play the game she played with Malgus. Revan was kind of just confused as he told her to come forward and tell him what it was. Sola looked up and handed Revan the sphere. She expressed that the ancient people of Byss believed there were clues or links that could lead to the Starforge. However, it would require them going to 3 different planets and scouring them for the potential artifacts. Being that the people of the ancient world didn't want anyone to find it unless it was absolutely necessary, it would be extremely difficult for them to find it. Revan looked at the sphere and then asked why it would be more difficult, assuming that she was suggesting he and his armies wouldn't be able to find it. Sola expressed that while she was examining the sphere, she pulled up data on the people of Byss. There were individuals who knew the history that worked in the museum where the sphere was. They likely would have been able to give insight on it. Even more than that, give details that would aid them in their quest. Revan asked what happened to them, and Sola told him that Malgus wanted everyone killed, so if they survived the initial attack, they likely were killed if they didn't escape. Though she did say that there were 3 planets that were likely of interest, at least according to the text on the side of the sphere. It was Sierra, Endor, and Bakura. Revan scoffed and turned around. He spoke to himself quietly, so quiet that no one else could hear him. He just admitted that he was so annoyed with Malgus. He was always thinking about conquest and never about the potential success in some other facet of the grand plan. Malgus stalled them, and at this point in the race, they could not afford to be even a day behind the Republic. Revan highly doubted that the Separatists were in on the joke, but if they were, then they couldn't allow either corrupt faction to take control over the Starforge. He turned back and thanked her for her assistance, and told her that she would be staying here on his flagship for the time being. He dismissed the other Sith aside from Malak and her, and brought her over to the communication table and placed a sphere above it. As the sphere lay down, it was lifted up, and out from it, there were 3 holomaps. Sola was left in awe. Revan turned to her and told her that She still had much to learn, though she was off by not more than a fingertip from getting the correct combination. The people in Byss liked their riddles, but they were always too simple for their own good. It's why they failed against the likes of Malgus. Though the chances are that the Axis of 3, that was now of 2, would likely be able to hold their own against any other assaults pressed forward by Malgus or the Sith. Revan pointed to the star map and noted how out of date the readings were. They were even more out of date than he was, though as he looked at it, it gave him some more insight than he would initially believe. Despite the star maps not having been updated, it would do them better. Revan used the table to zoom in on the maps that were pulled up, and it closed in on the 3 planets of the far west side of the galaxy. They were all in a row. It was the same 3 planets that Sola mentioned previously. How interesting. They embedded the map within the sphere, but was also on the exterior for those who could read it. Something was off with this. Revan looked at the sphere and held it up. As he examined it, he asked Sola if she noticed anything else about the sphere that she didn't mention. She said that she didn't find anything else, but if she may be as still bold to state it, that it seemed like there was something wrong. Revan looked over to her and waited for her to come forward. She was obviously timid because of her experience with Malgus, but when he wasn't as hostile, she moved forward and stood close to him, but not too close. She showed Revan that the designs on the sphere were different than the markings on the interior. He asked what she was referring to. She expressed that clearly they were trying to send mixed signals about where the artifacts were going. She took the sphere down and allowed the table to do a full scan of the sphere before putting up 2 holograms side by side. One was a sphere laid out on a flat map, and the other one was a star map from the interior. He looked at it and immediately caught what she was saying. There it was. Revan figured it out. He told the others to look closer. The stars that were charted went in the same 3 planets, but they gave precise locations. Of course, the star map on the exterior was carved in, so it was permanent. The map from the interior was simply a mirror. In other words, the intention was for the people who took it, if they were not Byss, to open it up and trust the wrong set of coordinates. Like Revan said, the ancient Byss believed they were clever when in reality, they were just stupid. Revan turned back to the front of the ship and called out an order and told the crew to plot a course to Sierra. The fleet needed to be ready for anything. The deckhands quickly got to work. Revan turned to Sola and told her that she'd be staying with his army for the time being. She might as well get herself comfortable and acquainted with the troops they were going to be serving with. Revan shooed Malak away and told him to take Sola to the troops. Malak bowed and started away. Revan turned back and walked across the catwalk to the front of the bridge and watched as his fleet departed into hyperspace. Malak and Sola were both very quiet and didn't say anything, which was fine. Sola's ribs still hurt, so talking wasn't exactly the most fun experience for her, but she was actively trying to turn that pain into fuel for the dark side. It was a learning experience. As they came down, Malak stopped. He looked at Sola as if he was listening to something, and then he barged into a room. There were a number of acolytes and marauders standing around. In the front was a lieutenant or the highest-ranking Sith in the army that wasn't Malak or Revan. Sola stepped in behind Malak, and he told her that this was Coriel Sue, and the rest of them could be introduced by Coriel if he wanted. Sola nodded her head and watched Malak. He stared at Coriel as if there was some tension between the two of them before whipping around and storming out of the room. Sola looked back and Coriel said that she shouldn't worry about Malak. She nodded her head and looked around. Coriel asked where she was coming from. She recognized a couple of individuals from the bridge, but Coriel was there too. Maybe he wasn't paying attention, but she said that she was last deployed at Byss. One of the Sith spoke up, telling her that she had to tell them about her experience there. From what the troops heard, they won the battle. Sola nodded her head and told them that it was a fierce fight, but with Lord Malgus, they were able to storm the planet and catch the Republic off guard. Coriel smiled and told her that it was always good to crush the Republic forces. Sola nodded her head. She said that it was much more enjoyable with the clones than it was with the droids. Coriel agreed. He said nothing beat crushing a clone's windpipe or simply killing them. They were all brothers, so it made their pain so much easier to feed off of. Some of the Sith ferried in and out of the room, but for the most part they stayed in the room talking about the conquest and so forth. What surprised the troops were her interactions with Malgus. She didn't bad talk him, she just told more PG stories of what she experienced under his command. She now got to learn what it felt like to serve under Malak and Revan. Coriel mentioned that Revan could be a mean cuss sometimes, but nothing in comparison to Malak. He could get upset and then he would just let it ride within him for the longest time. Coriel expressed that there was a growing tension between Malak and Revan. Not that he believed it would come to a boiling point, or at least not openly admitting that he believed it would. The troops also told her about their previous couple battles. They were stuck in a line of battles against the Separatists, which was really quite a drag. The battle droids were a pain to deal with, mostly due to their exorbitant numbers. It was hard to compete with, though Coriel showed a lot of excitement for working under Revan. His strategy is what got them through, because unlike Malgus, Revan knew how to persevere with his troops. Revan was going 4 battles strong, he won 4 of them and he had a draw at the other. This was 4 battles back to back to back to back without having to wait for troops or fresh supplies. He was a brilliant tactician. Sola saw this as a night-to-day contrast with Malgus, because he had absolutely no issue sacrificing any and all troops whenever he wanted. But because of that, Malgus was stuck on Byss, which gave the other 2 from the former Axis of 3 to form up the defenses and prepare. Malgus also got a little cocky, which meant a number of civilians were able to escape and inform the Republic of the strategy used during the Battle of Byss. Kroll came back and told Sola about their previous battle. The order of the 4 battles they had were victory, draw, victory, and of course the previous battle, which was a victory. Sola looked up and he jumped up expressing it was a slaughter. The Republic and the Separatists were interlocked in a battle when they arrived. Sola asked about that, because she thought that they typically didn't fight. Kroll said that they didn't, which is why it was peculiar. He said that despite Revan not thinking the Seppies were onto the Starforge, Kroll thought they were. He believed that they knew everything about the weapon. Anyways, he told her that they jumped the gun and Revan was able to perfectly sweep them. She asked what it was, and he essentially said they split the fleet up, one around the backside of the unsuspecting fleets and blindsided both of them. With nowhere to go, they ran forward and all they could do was run into each other, which is why the debris field was so close to the other. She admired the move. Korra was exhilarated about this. He was so pumped about it. He told her that this group of Sith was unlike any other group of Sith in the galaxy. They may have been with Lord Revan, but they were quite the group. They were all good with each other, though Sola realized something. Despite they're supposed to be a mix of acolytes and marauders, this was only a group of Sith marauders. It wasn't mixed and matched. Korra was the lead of them both, but he was a marauder too. Though Korra didn't make a mention of it, he just expressed that his loyalties lay with Revan. As the trip through hyperspace passed by, Korra and Sola continued the structuring of their alliance. While Sola wasn't technically a marauder or an acolyte, she was a Sith. She was just like them, and Korra and the other marauders welcomed her into their ranks. As Korra liked to believe, the acolytes were more so for cannon fodder, but the marauders were the ones you brought in when you wanted to ensure victory came. The group told each other stories of conquest and even delusions of grandeur. Some of the marauders wished to be students of Exar, Malgus, Kreia, or Vitiate, while others believed they could become worthy of the rank of Sith Lord. Of course, it was all a bit of fun banter, but one could see how high or how low a marauder held themselves. During the talk, Korra would leave and then he'd come back within 20 to 30 minutes, as he expressed he liked to give consistent updates to Lord Revan. Sola asked why Korra never mentioned Malak, and he simply laughed it off. He told her that Malak was a fall guy. Revan didn't care about him, or at least this was from Korra's perspective because he couldn't see why Revan would ever care about Malak. He was just a waste of space. Korra believed that he should be with Revan and be his apprentice, but this wasn't something he often vocally said, let alone said to Sola in the moment. At the end of their journey, Revan activated the switch to inform the troops of the vessel to prepare for the ground invasion. They didn't really know what they were arriving to here at Syria, but Revan wanted the troops to be ready. If there was a battle to be fought on the ground, then they would fight it. If not, no worry. But it was better to be prepared for anything at all times. Korra told Sola to tag along with him, so that's what she did. The other marauders and acolytes had to ferry themselves down with the regular troops, while Korra got to go down in the last few dropships, which meant for him, he'd be safe from whatever ground fire there was. Korra was a frontline warrior, but it was his way of gaslighting the troops into believing he was one of them. As he and Sola made their way to their dropship, the doors closed, and they stood on the interior alone. He said that she would probably be around here for a while, so she might as well understand the chain of command here. He said that the grunts were all here to make sure he got to the surface safe. If she wanted any part of that, then she was more than welcome to join him. It was clear that despite his outwards hostility to just about everyone, Korra took a liking to Sola. He expressed that what he did for his troops was serve on the front lines, but he told them that Revan wanted him at the last transport to the surface just to keep him safe. The truth is, Korra told his troops he wasn't allowed to be at the front lines per the command of Revan. The troops bought it, and so when Korra came running up to the front lines after the landing procedure, it was his way of saying he would fight with his men until the bitter end. While Korra loved the conquest, he didn't care about any of them. Only little of this was ever revealed to Sola. He just told her that he preferred to get a running start at the front lines anyways, which is why he was fine with the last vessel. How interesting. Regardless, it was a wheel of fortune with Korra, as she came to find out. As the fleet exited hyperspace, the ship rocked back and forth. They just entered another battle. Revan called over the intercoms and called out Battle Formation 37. Sola looked over at Korra and he smiled, pulling a helmet over his head and telling her that they were going to be boarding the enemy vessel and taking over the capital ship. Sola looked back with a shocked expression, saying that she thought Revan didn't risk his forces. He didn't, it was calculated. The bay doors opened and the dropships ferried out. At the same time, Malak was sent to the surface of Syria alone. The Separatists had tracked the Republic fleet out this far and ended up engaging them again. Jedi Master Even Pill and Captain Tarkin were leading the campaign out here, and then they got jumped by the Separatists. Admiral Trench didn't know what the Republic was doing, which is why he kept beginning engagements with them. He assumed that the Republic was trying to get around his flanks to get reinforcements. The only reason he engaged the Republic is because he believed they were coming for him, when in reality, he wasn't even in the viewfinder. The fleet engaged in battle. Revan could see the command ships for the Separatists and the Republic. Luckily, the Republic was on the far side of the planet. The Separatists were in the middle, and the Sith were behind them. The only thing they had to do was take out the Separatists and chase down the Republic. Truthfully, Revan believed that even Peel would dip before he could even get to them, simply based on an algorithm of previous battles involving an inferior Republic fleet, though there was one outlier. But, as Revan learned, Skywalker has since been dealt with by Nihilus. The dropships ripped out of the hangar bays and started towards the Separatist flagship. It was a Lucrehulk, and Revan had one instruction: capture the ship. He didn't care how it was done, he just wanted one on his fleet. The dropships didn't encounter too much flak as they sped towards the back of the line. The flak that hit the fleet upon their arrival was stray shots from Republic lines. The dropships sped through the field of combat as the Lucrehulk's rear cannons turned the fire at the dropships. Luckily, the cannons were heavy cannons. Unluckily, the dropships were in a batch of vessels heading in one direction. They broke off into evasive action. The flak was stiff, but the dropship pilots were some of the best within the ranks of the Sith army. They slipped through the fire and avoided a couple of spare Vulture droids, as the Sith made their landing procedure on the interior. Once they broke into the hangar bays, the Sith exited from their vessels, and the droids who maintained the interiors were caught off guard. Warriors ignited their lightsabers, and Coriel ignited his lightsaber inside the ship. When the doors opened, Sola leapt out, igniting the Crimson Blade and watching his flames engulf the interior of the ship. At the command of the Separatist fleet was Captain Mark Took. He was ordering the fleet around and combating against the strategy of Captain Tarkin to perfection. Master Peel knew this battle would be decisive loss, so he tried to order Tarkin into a retreat, but the captain was adamant that a break would come. With the Republic fleet holding, there was no guarantee they'd be able to handle themselves against both fleets. Tarkin was gunning for Captain Took, though. They had bad blood because of a skirmish over Ord Mantell, one that Tarkin lost. His emotions got the best of him, and his outright disliking of the Jedi was showing more and more. Tuck noticed the Republic not calling off their assault and proposed a strategy where the Separatists could loop around the starboard side of the flank, pop the Republic, and then pull the fleet around and hold off the Sith, though his strategy changed as he started receiving news of Sith inside of his flagship. He looked on the monitors and saw dozens of Sith warriors running down the halls, though Tuck noticed something in particular. Unlike previous Sith iterations, they would rip the ship apart. They were actively trying to avoid damaging the interior of this vessel. Tuck turned to the droids and gave them all a command to obliterate the ship. He knew that Revan wouldn't get on the ship, per se, but their fleet would get into range of the explosion if the Separatists moved out of the way. Tuck ordered the fleet to move ahead and he would join them. The Keda-Nemonian captain abandoned the bridge and made his way down the halls with an escort. In the lower levels of the vessel, Sola and Coriel were moving side by side. This wasn't intentional. They got separated in the hangar bay, and while they were separated, they destroyed a number of droids. They rekindled when they helped each other take down a bundle of destroyer droids. Sola was impressed with Coriel's skill. For a marauder, he wasn't too bad. Typically they were brutes that swung their lightsabers without any finesse, but he had it. Coriel was also very impressed with her. Aside from the rumors circulating from Byss, and the little input he got during their time in hyperspace, he didn't expect her to be so proficient with the blade and with the Force. She used a reverse grip of the Form 2 blade, and it was really awkward to look at, but she made it look natural. It was partially of her design, which is why it was an odd look. They charged down the hallways until a rocket blasted part of the ship apart. Tuck told the Hellfires in the hangar bay to detonate the hallways and kill as many as possible, which is what they did. The Hellfires opened up, and the Sith were left either to be blown to hell or get sucked into the abyss of space. Sola and Coriel were running down the hallway, ducking and avoiding super battle droids in the lot. All of a sudden, one of those Hellfire rockets sped past them and slammed into the wall, opening up a hole on the backside of the ship. Both Coriel and Sola saw the hole and looked at it for a moment. They could see the Sith fleet before they got sucked towards it. Sola reached out and grabbed onto the wall, and then she grabbed the only thing she could reach to the closest person to her, which happened to be Coriel. She grabbed the back of his robes, and so as the abyss of space was pulling him towards it, he was gasping for air. He looked back and saw her arms, his legs flailing in the air as he pulled his arms back and lashed onto her arm. Her grip on the corner of the wall was slipping, but they were able to hold on just long enough for the ratio to open up and allow them to drop. They both fell to the ground and laughed it off, helping each other off their feet and then looking at each other. The first words out of Coriel's mouth was, "Do you want to gut that Nemodian with me?" Of course she did. They grabbed their lightsabers and continued forward. They worked their way through the battle droids and got to an elevator. As they caught their breath, they wondered where the rest of their forces were. Coriel expressed that it didn't matter. They would show up, or they wouldn't. Perhaps they'd be able to capture the ship together and prove to Revan why she should be here. Sounded like a good plan to her. She didn't care much for the other troops anyways, but figured she'd ask just in case he was concerned about them at all. But as is the way of the Sith. When the doors opened, there was what looked to be a brigade of B-2 battle droids. Their lightsabers ignited and they moved forward. Sola and Coriel blocked every shot they could, using the Force to throw rockets back at the droids. The two of them got forward, and Coriel told her to cover him. She listened as his lightsaber extinguished and he rolled behind her. Back to back, he reached out with the Force, using all of his pain, anger, and passion to rip panels off the wall and fling them behind him. Massive chunks of the wall slid past Sola and Coriel and crushed into the battle droids. The battle droids were fighting with so much power as they could, but they weren't getting anywhere. Sola stopped when Coriel looked over at her. She was gritting her teeth. In front of her hands were every single blaster shot that was being fired at their direction, and she was holding them. She was slipping, so Coriel joined her. It was a massive focus because there were rockets and several thousand blaster bolts. The two of them used all their strength and flung the blaster bolts back out. The battle droids were ripped to pieces and the rockets blew up in the walls. But they were closer to the middle of the ship so they didn't open the halls into space. They ran forward with a clear path, and then they threw their lightsabers into the wall so they could cut it down and get into the bridge. Their blades rolled around each side of the door and met in the middle. They used the Force and launched the door in and ran in. The entire bridge was empty and they looked out. The Separatist fleet was moving away. The Republic fleet, on the other hand, was making a swift retreat. Tarkin's arrogance cost the Republic a couple support ships. He pulled the fleet away, and as Coriel was looking out the battle, Sola told him they needed to run. She pulled his arm backwards and told him to contact the fleet. They started running as an explosion sounded from the bridge. Coriel yelled out to Revan, telling him to get away from the ship. It was a bomb. Revan nearly panicked when the news came over the comms. He told the fleet to disperse, which put them into a terrible position strategically. But he did it. Inside of the Lucrehulk, the Sith dropships evacuated from the ship, but they ended up leaving behind both Coriel and Sola, who didn't know they were still alive. The two of them ran through the broken halls as they tried to get away, down to the hangar bay. An explosion broke off and blew them into a wall. Coriel was the first to get up, and he pulled Sola off the ground, and they continued running forward. She noted that wasn't very Sith-like of him. It was kind of peculiar, but she didn't have time to think about it. They got to the hangar bay eventually, and it was mostly void. They looked back and forth. The ship continued to rumble, and they began the stabilizers to break, so the ship began to tilt. Coriel and Sola continued running forward, and they found a shuttle. As they got in, Coriel and Sola jumped into the pilot's seats and pulled away. They hit the throttle as hard as they could as they exited the vessel. The explosions cut through the walls behind them, and they were able to barely avoid being hit by the explosions. They pulled the Separatist shuttle through the end of the hangar bay and felt the shockwave of the explosion through the ship they were in further. They were able to successfully escape, but they weren't done yet. They still had to get back to the fleet. Revan was able to pull everything back together in a relatively timely manner, which allowed him to make a successful counterattack on the Separatists. Captain Tuck was surprised and decided that he would let the battle come to an end today. In his book, it was a draw. To Revan, it was a victory. Inside the Separatist shuttle, Coriel and Sola looked at each other. The shuttle was drifting slowly towards the flagship, and they turned their chairs towards each other. They leaned in and put their foreheads together. There wasn't much more than that needed to be said or done. They both, in their own way, were able to thank the other for being there for them. Was it a break in their Sith code, or was it something more? The two of them held their heads against each other for what felt like hours, but it was only moments. When they arrived back in the flagship, they exited the shuttle to see the other Sith Marauders and Acolytes standing there. Most of them had survived. Coriel was furious, but he didn't show it, and the only reason is because Lord Malik's vessel was arriving at the same time. He had to be obedient for the arrival of the true second in command. Malik walked out of the vessel and turned to see Coriel and Sola standing next to each other. He turned and walked away, holding a small object in his hands. Coriel turned and walked over to the troops and told them that they did well in their mission. Sola watched on a little bit in confusion. When he was done, he came back towards her and thanked her for saving his life when a hole was blasted in the side of the ship. She said to him that she didn't really do anything. He just held on. It was a funny but charming little moment between the two of them. On the bridge, Malik and Revan were holding the artifact collected from the surface of Sarah. It was found in a small broken down structure. It wasn't too difficult to find. It was a small triangle. On one side was a small structure that Malik found the artifact at. On the other side was a cave painting, which was certainly odd, and on the last side there was a structure. Revan looked at the structure and then pulled up a holomap of the current city located in Bakura, and the structure wasn't present on the updated holomap of the city. Revan looked at the student and then to the front of the bridge. He told them to prepare invasion forces for an attack at Bakura. And that, my friends, is our episode. Again, special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bang, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Wiwu 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT 7567, Azavaz, Darth Nox, the Eternal Padawan Malik, Johnny Naguin, Sans the Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calig, Madman Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Borders Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, the main 3 first names, Dark46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. If you want to support me in other ways, go check out the Patreon. There are early updates for Sith Clone Wars and animations on there, so that's pretty cool. Anyways, hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.